What would you do if the billionaire who owned the house where you wash dishes grabbed your wrist and said your scars looked like the child he lost? How do you stay calm when you realize the man who pays you like a servant might actually be your father and his whole family wants you gone? Can a quiet dishwasher use the truth, a few old papers, and the law to turn a lifetime of being erased into a reckoning they never saw coming? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Rowan Pierce, and for most of my life, people have looked right through me like I was a smudge on a window, annoying but easy to wipe away and forget. I work behind other people's smiles, in hot kitchens and crowded back rooms, carrying plates no one remembers and cleaning up messes no one admits they made. I am 32 years old, and I can tell you that people show their true faces when they think you are just the help, when they believe you have no power and no voice. That night at the Billionaire's party started like every other shift. It was sweat on my neck, detergent on my hands, and a quiet promise to myself that I would get through it without trouble, keep my head down, and go home with a little money to pay the rent. The Cole estate looked like a picture from a magazine when I arrived. All spotless stone and glowing windows, and a driveway full of black cars that cost more than my entire building. I came through the service entrance, of course, past the dumpsters and the rattling vent fans, where the air smelled like old grease and bleach instead of flowers and expensive perfume. Inside, the catering kitchen was already chaos. Pots boiled, ovens blasted heat, and the floor was slick in places no one had time to mop. The head chef barked orders, the line cooks cursed under their breath in 3 different languages, and dish racks arrived at my station faster than I could empty them. This was my world, steel and steam and clattering plates, and I knew my role perfectly. Wash, rinse, stack, repeat. When you live like that, your body learns to move automatically while your mind drifts somewhere else. Mine often wandered back to small things, like the way my mother always pulled my sleeves down when I was a kid, or how she changed the subject whenever I asked about my father. She used to tell me that my scars came from some accident when I was a baby, something about hot water and a pan, but she never liked when I asked for more details. I stopped asking in my teens. People like us are not encouraged to dig too deep into anything. The event manager, Trent, burst into the kitchen waving a clipboard and shouting that we were already behind. He loved reminding us that the guests upstairs were important, as if we were too stupid to notice the expensive suits and glittering jewelry when we carried food past them. He talked like the host was royalty, and we were the servants from an old story who could be sent away with a snap of the fingers. He did not bother to remember most of our names. I was just the quiet dish guy who never caused trouble, and that suited him fine. At some point, a waiter dropped a tray of glasses, and the crash made everyone jump. The chef shouted that this was why we needed to focus and not act like idiots. No one yelled at the guests when they bumped into staff or spilled drinks. We were the ones who had to be perfect or pay the price. After the first rush of dinner plates, Trent told me to take a tray of fresh glassware into the ballroom and bring back a set of used ones. It was not normally my job, but everyone was stretched thin and he did not care who carried what as long as nothing went wrong. I wiped my hands on my apron, balanced the tray on my palms, and followed one of the waiters through the swinging door and into another world. The ballroom was bright and cold, full of polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and people who held themselves like they owned everything they saw. Soft music floated around them, and laughter came in sharp bursts like tiny fireworks. I kept my eyes low, threading my way between tables and servers. The centerpiece of the room was a pedestal near the far wall. On it stood an antique vase, tall and pale, with delicate blue patterns curling around its sides. I did not know anything about art, but even I could tell that it was old and important. People turned their heads toward it when they entered, like it was another guest at the party. As I moved along the edge of the room with the tray, I heard a group of younger men talking near the bar. Their voices cut through the background noise because they spoke loudly, on purpose, the way people do when they want to be sure others hear them. They joked about the staff, saying that some people were born to polish forks and carry trays, and that it must be nice to have no responsibilities except not dropping anything. One of them laughed that if he messed up, his father would cut his allowance, but if we messed up, we would get thrown into the street. I recognized one of them from photos I had seen online. Cassian Cole, the official heir to the Cole fortune. He had the same sharp cheekbones as the older man I had seen in the news, but his face was softer, smugger, like nothing bad had ever stuck to him for long. He leaned against the bar, drink in hand, and looked right through me as I passed, like I was part of the furniture. A waiter ahead of me signaled that he was ready for the fresh glasses. I adjusted my grip on the tray and stepped around the pedestal with the vase. Careful, 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 repeating the word in my head like a prayer. The floor looked smooth, but one of the guests had spilled a thin splash of something clear that no one had wiped yet. My shoe slid just enough to throw off my balance. I lurched forward, tried to correct, and felt the tray tilt. A glass rolled toward the edge. I caught it with one hand, but my elbow clipped the pedestal. Time slowed down in that strange way it does before disaster. I felt the vibration of the impact travel up my arm. I saw the vase wobble, tilt, and then begin to fall. Someone gasped. The music went on for a second, then cut off with a rough scratch. The vase hit the marble floor and exploded into 100 pieces that flashed under the chandeliers like a burst of glass rain. Shards skittered across my shoes. The tray in my hands clattered as my grip failed, and the remaining glasses rattled, one or two chiming as they broke. The entire room went silent except for the last rolling fragment tapping against the stone. Every face turned toward me. I stood frozen, chest tight, mouth dry, my hands still stretched out like I could pull the moment back somehow. Trent appeared at my side so fast he might have teleported. His fingers dug into my arm as he dragged me away from the mess. He hissed in my ear that I had just smashed something worth more than I would see in my entire life, that the vase was some kind of rare antique, that the host would be furious, and that the catering company would make sure I paid for this in whatever way they could. I did not argue. What could I say? I had made a mistake in a room where we were not allowed to make mistakes. As he pulled me toward the staff corridor, I caught the sound of Cassian's voice behind me, amused and lazy. He said something about how this is what happens when you let people from the back of the house near real art. His friends laughed. Their laughter followed me all the way to the doorway. Just before Trent could shove me through the service entrance, another voice cut across the room. It was quieter than the jokes at the bar, but somehow everyone heard it. I recognized it from news clips and interviews, from videos where he spoke about success and legacy and responsibility. Lysander Cole, the billionaire host, told Trent to wait. Trent straightened instantly, his grip loosening just enough for my arm to stop aching. I turned and saw Lysander walking toward us, stepping carefully around the broken glass. His expression was hard to read from a distance, but as he came closer, I saw that his jaw was tight, and his eyes were fixed not on my face, but on my hands. I realized I was still holding the empty tray. My fingers were trembling. Old scars ran in pale lines across my wrists and the backs of my hands, twisting slightly where the skin had healed unevenly long ago. They always stood out more when my skin was wet or hot, and right then they were very clear. Lysander stopped in front of me and looked down at those marks as if the broken vase did not exist. For a long moment, he said nothing. The room stayed quiet, guests watching from a careful distance, staff frozen in place. Then he asked where I had gotten those scars. His voice did not rise. He did not shout. He spoke like a man asking the time, but his eyes looked like they were seeing something far away and very ugly. I answered with the only story I had ever been given. I told him that my mother said there had been an accident when I was a baby, something to do with boiling water and a pot, and that I did not remember any of it. As I spoke, his face changed. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand tightened around the edge of the pedestal that was now empty. For a second he swayed, like someone had hit him. Trent started to say that this was all a stupid mistake, and that he would handle the consequences with my employer, but Lysander cut him off with a small movement of his hand. He stepped closer and took my wrist, turning my hand gently to see every angle of the old scars. His fingers were cold. I could feel them shaking. He told Trent that the vase was just an object, and that insurance existed for a reason. He said the staff could clean it up later. His eyes never left my hands. Then he told me that he needed to show me something. The way he said it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was not a request. It sounded like a man who had just seen a ghost and was trying to prove to himself that it was real. Guests started to murmur again. The music tried to resume, and staff moved in with brooms and bins. Trent looked confused and annoyed, but he did not argue. Lysander kept hold of my arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that I understood there was no polite way to refuse. He led me across the edge of the ballroom, past the curious stairs and the broken glass, toward a side door half hidden by a large painting. He pressed something near the frame, and a panel clicked. The door opened into a narrow, dim hallway that looked nothing like the bright public rooms. As I stepped through after him, I felt the air change, cooler and heavier, like I was walking into the back of my own past. The door shut behind us with a soft but final sound, and for the first time in my life, I felt that the scars on my hands were not just ugly marks, but keys to a story I had never been allowed to hear. I followed Lysander down the narrow hallway, my wet shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor, the sounds of the party fading behind us like someone had closed a lid on that whole shining world. The lights in the corridor were softer and warmer, and old paintings hung in heavy frames on the walls, faces of people who looked a little like him in different clothes and different ages. He still held my wrist, not tight enough to hurt, but firm enough that I knew he did not want me slipping away. My heart thudded in my chest, not from fear of being fired now, but from something stranger, something I could not name yet. At the end of the hall, he stopped in front of a door with a coded lock. He entered a sequence without even looking at it, like his fingers had learned it long ago. The lock clicked, and he pushed the door open. Inside was a small, quiet room that felt like a shrine. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. There were shelves with books and a few carefully arranged objects. But what caught my eye right away were the photographs on one wall. They were framed in a neat grid, all of them showing the same baby at different angles. The baby lay in a hospital crib or in someone's arms, wrapped in blankets, with tubes and monitors nearby in some of them. What made it impossible for me to look away were the bandages around the tiny wrists and the angry, healing scars underneath, visible in a few of the shots where the bandages were loose. The lines of those scars ran in familiar paths. They twisted and crossed the same way mine did, as if someone had traced the same strange pattern on both our skins. Lysander let go of my wrist and stepped up to the wall. His hand hovered near the glass of one of the frames, fingers shaking. He told me, in a strained voice, that the baby in the pictures was his first child. He said there had been a fire in one of the older wings of the estate, in the staff quarters years ago, when the baby was only a few months old. He said the fire had started in the kitchen, that smoke had filled the rooms, that there had been confusion and noise and people running. He said they had been told that the child did not survive. The doctors had shown them a tiny burned body wrapped in white. The funeral had been closed casket. His voice broke once on that word. I stared at the photos, then looked down at my own hands. The room felt smaller each second, like the walls were leaning in. I thought of my mother pulling my sleeves down when I was little, telling me not to worry about how I looked, telling me that what mattered was that I was alive. I thought of the way she always changed the subject when I asked about our life before the small apartment where my memory begins. I asked him why he was showing this to me. The question sounded thin in the heavy air. He turned to face me, his eyes red and bright, and said that my scars looked like his child's scars. Not similar, the same. He said he had not seen marks like that in all the years since, not even in textbooks and medical files his people had collected while they tried to understand what had happened. He said when he saw my hands in the ballroom, it was like seeing a ghost step out of the past and break a vase in the present just to make him look up. I did not know what to say. My life, my memories, my mother's simple stories all suddenly felt thin and fragile, like cheap wrapping paper someone had taped over something else. I told him my name, slowly, as if hearing it for the first time. Rowan Pierce. It sounded small in that room full of his family's history. He repeated my name like he was rolling it around his tongue, trying to taste it, trying to feel if it fit somewhere he had not known was empty. He asked about my mother, about where I was born, about what she had told me. I answered as best I could. I said that I did not remember anything before about 3 years old. I said we had moved often when I was a kid, that she always told me the past did not matter as long as we could pay rent and keep going. I said no one had ever mentioned this house or his family to me. His face tightened when I said that, a mix of anger and guilt and something like fear. Before he could say more, someone knocked on the door behind us. A woman's voice, smooth and cool, called his name and said the guests were asking for him. The succession of footsteps outside told me she was not alone. He flinched, like he had been caught doing something he should not. He moved quickly to the door, cracked it open, and told whoever was out there that he would be there in a moment. When he turned back to me, the open grief on his face was already folding itself into something harder and more controlled. He told me this room and these photos were never meant to be seen by staff. He said tonight had gone off script. He told me, in a careful tone, that there had clearly been a tragic confusion in the past, and that he needed time to confirm details, to talk to certain people, to check records that were not simple to access. He asked me not to speak to anyone about what he had shown me, not the other staff, not my boss, not anyone. He said that there were things powerful people did not like dragged into the light without preparation. That was how he put it. Preparation. Like truth was another dinner event they had to stage correctly. I should have been offended by that, maybe, but I was still dizzy. I just nodded. He placed a hand on my shoulder, almost fatherly, and said he would be in touch soon. He promised, in that smooth public voice I knew from his speeches, that I would not be punished for the accident with the vase. He said some things were more important than objects. The door opened wider. A tall woman in an elegant dress, Sienna, his wife, appeared in the crack with 2 other people behind her. She gave me a sharp, measuring look, like she was trying to place where I fit in her world. Lysander told her he was just dealing with a small issue and that the staff member was leaving now. She smiled at him, not at me, and said the guests were waiting for his speech. I slipped past them, back into the hallway, my mind buzzing. The rest of the night went by in a blur. I returned to the kitchen, where Trent was waiting with tight lips and red cheeks. He said the host had told him not to fire me, but that I had still made the company look bad, that I was on thin ice, and that I needed to remember my place. Every word felt smaller than the room I had just left. I finished my shift like a machine, hands moving automatically through soapy water, mind stuck on the photos on that wall and the way Lysander's voice shook when he spoke about his dead child. When I finally got back to my apartment, the silence felt loud. My place is a small box in an old building, with thin walls and a kitchen that is more hallway than room. I turned on the single overhead light and watched dust drift through the beam, trying to ground myself. My mother was not there. She lives across town now in a smaller place, 1 bus ride and a 20-minute walk away. We do not see each other as often as we should, mostly because we both work odd hours and because we have never been good at talking about anything deeper than bills and the weather. I poured myself a glass of water, stared at it, and finally sat down at the worn table. I laid my hands flat on the surface and studied the scars I had known all my life. Thin ridges of pale, twisted skin, crossing near my wrists and fading out toward my fingers like branches of a dead tree. My mother had always made them sound like an unfortunate accident, something bad that happened once and then was over. But nothing about the way Lysander looked at them felt like just an accident. I thought about my childhood, the parts I remembered. Cheap apartments with peeling paint, boxes that never got fully unpacked, my mother working double shifts in kitchens and cleaning offices at night, her saying it was better not to talk about the past, that we had to focus on staying afloat. When I asked about my father, she said he was gone, that it was complicated, that I should be proud of her for raising me alone. She never used words like dead or alive, just gone. It hit me, sitting in that cramped kitchen, that I had accepted that answer too easily for too long because life kept me tired and because it was easier to live forward than to turn around and stare into a fog. The next day, I was called into the catering company's HR office. The room was windowless and beige, decorated with generic posters about teamwork and safety. Trent sat in one chair, stiff and annoyed. A woman from HR sat across from me with a file on the table. She said the Vase incident was serious. She said clients like the Coles had expectations. She reminded me that the company did not have to keep me employed. It was not said directly, but the message was clear. People like me are easy to replace. I apologized, even though I knew the apology was just a formality. I promised to be more careful. She said they had decided not to fire me, but they were reducing my hours for now. It was punishment wrapped in soft words. Reduced hours meant less money. Less money meant harder choices. As I left, Trent muttered that I should be grateful I still had a job at all. On my break that evening, I met Maya at the laundromat down the block from my place. We often crossed paths there, letting old machines shake the dirt out of our uniforms while we sat on plastic chairs and rested aching feet. The air smelled like detergent and warm metal. I told her, in vague terms, that something weird had happened at the party, that the host had reacted strangely to my scars. She raised her eyebrows and said rich people loved secrets even more than they loved money. She joked that maybe I was his long-lost son, then laughed and shook her head before I could react. She said if that were true, they would still probably find a way to keep me in the kitchen. I did not laugh. That night, I climbed up to the roof of my building after my shift. The city lights spread out around me, some bright, some flickering, some already dead, though they still seemed alive from far away. I leaned on the low wall, feeling the rough concrete under my palms. The air was cool, and for once, no one was asking me to carry anything, scrub anything, or fix anyone's mess. I thought of the baby in the photos, of Lysander's trembling hand, of my mother's silence. I wondered how many times in my life I had been pushed aside not just because I was poor, but because someone wanted a whole piece of history to stay buried. Just as I was starting to feel that heavy thought settle into something like anger, my phone buzzed in my pocket, loud in the quiet night. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I answered, half expecting a wrong number. A man's smooth voice introduced himself as Victor Ames and said he represented the Cole family. He told me they wanted a quiet meeting about what had happened at the party and that it was in my best interest to hear him out. Victor's voice on the phone was calm and smooth, the kind of voice used to close deals and make problems disappear. He said he wanted to meet somewhere neutral, somewhere comfortable, where we could talk without noise. I did not like the sound of that, but I agreed, because at that point I felt like I was standing on the edge of a story I did not understand, and he clearly held pages I did not have. We met the next afternoon at a downtown cafe that was nicer than the places I usually went. The chairs were soft, the cups heavy, and the barista treated him like a regular. Victor wore a dark suit that fit perfectly and a small, practiced smile. He shook my hand and thanked me for coming like I had done him a favor. He started by talking about how stressful big events could be, how little accidents happened, how the Cole family valued the work of everyone who helped make their evenings run smoothly. He said I was a hard-working young man who had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I listened and waited. Finally, he leaned forward and said that the broken vase was not the real reason he had called me. He said the host had been surprised to see me, and that some old feelings had surfaced, and that people sometimes reacted strongly when they were reminded of past pain. That was how he described it. Past pain. Like he was talking about a scar on a memory instead of a dead child. I told him I had seen the photos in the small room. He did not flinch. He said the Coles had gone through a terrible tragedy years ago, and that sometimes grief made them act impulsively. He said they did not want anyone misreading their reactions or spreading stories that could hurt the family. While he spoke, he took a slim folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table between us. He slid it closer, keeping his fingers resting on the edge like he was not quite letting go. He said it was a simple agreement, a way to make sure everyone stayed on the same page, stayed protected. He said there would be a small financial gesture inside, a token of appreciation for my understanding and discretion. I did not open the folder. I kept my hands on my cup so he would see them shaking a little and maybe mistake that for nerves instead of anger. I asked him, in as steady a voice as I could manage, why I would need an agreement if I had done nothing wrong and if the vase was covered by insurance, like Lysander had said in the ballroom. For the first time, Victor's smile slipped a little. He said the agreement was standard, nothing unusual, just a way to make sure no one twisted what had happened into something ugly. He used phrases like online rumors and misinterpretations by staff and protecting privacy. Every word was smooth, but the meaning was sharp. They were worried about me talking. They were worried about me putting together pieces they had spent years keeping in separate boxes. I told him I would take the folder and think about it. He did not like that answer. He said it would be best if we handled things quickly before anyone got the wrong idea. I did not move. I said I would not sign anything without reading it in my own time. After a moment, he let go of the folder. His eyes cooled a few degrees. He said I should consider how hard it can be to find steady work without good references. He said the catering world was small. He did not threaten me directly, but he did not have to. I left the cafe with the folder still closed under my arm and a knot in my stomach. On the bus home, I stared at it and thought about my rent, my reduced hours, my mother's tired face. Fear pressed like a thumb on my throat. But under the fear, something else was growing, something slow and solid. I did not open the folder that night. Instead, I called my mother. I asked if we could meet in person, somewhere outside her apartment. She sounded wary, but she agreed. The next morning, we met at a downtown diner with cracked red booths and a waitress who called everyone honey. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched in her old coat, hair pulled back with a cheap clip. Her hands still smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals. She had come straight from a shift. I pushed the sugar packets around on the table and told her about the party, the broken vase, the strange room with the photos, the scars on the baby's wrists. I watched her face carefully as I spoke. At first she tried to stay neutral, but when I described the photos in detail, she went pale, then gray, like someone was slowly turning down the color in her. She reached for her coffee and missed, fingers trembling. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she told me that before I was born, she had worked as a live-in housekeeper for a rich family. She did not say the name at first, as if leaving it out might protect her, but I already knew. She said there had been a fire in the staff wing one night, that people had screamed and run, that smoke had filled the halls, that someone had handed her a bundle and shouted for her to get out. Later, she said, there had been confusion, mix-ups, people talking over each other. She was told to leave, to take me, to disappear. There had been money, some papers, promises that she did not fully understand. She said she had been young and scared and alone. She said they told her it was better for everyone if she started a new life somewhere else and did not come back. I asked her if she had ever told me the full story. She shook her head. She said she had been afraid that if I knew too much, I would go looking for them, and that men like that did not like surprises. She said she had signed things, taken their money, and used it to start over in cheap places where no one asked questions. I listened until I could not keep my mouth shut. I asked her if it had ever occurred to her that I had a right to know where I came from. I asked if it had ever bothered her that I grew up thinking my father simply vanished without a trace, like a ghost that left no shadow. She looked at me with tired eyes and said that of course it bothered her. She said every time she saw my scars, she thought about that night and wondered if she had done the right thing. But she also said that if she had refused, if she had fought harder, they might have taken me away or buried us both under lawyers and police and stories that made us look crazy. She said when you have nothing, you cannot fight people who own everything, not without losing more than you can afford. Her words hit me in two ways at once. Part of me understood the fear. Another part of me realized that she had decided on my silence without my consent and then built my life on top of it. I told her that their lawyer had already tried to buy my silence. I told her there was a folder in my apartment with some kind of agreement inside. She flinched and told me not to sign anything, then just as quickly told me not to make trouble. The instinct to protect me and the instinct to hide were fighting each other inside her. She reached across the table and took my hands, looking at the scars. She said she had always been grateful that I survived, that my skin had healed, that we could build any kind of life at all. She said she knew it had not been a good life, but it was still life. I pulled my hands back gently. I thanked her for what she had told me, but I also told her that I could not pretend this changed nothing. I said I needed to know more, and that I was tired of other people deciding what I should know and what I should accept. She looked like she wanted to argue, then just shook her head and stared at the table. After we parted, I did not go home. Instead, I followed a faded address on an old medical card my mother had once used for me when I was a child. It led to a small private clinic tucked between taller buildings with frosted glass doors and a quiet lobby. I went to the administrative office window and told the clerk my name and my mother's. I said I was trying to get copies of my early medical records. The clerk typed for a while, frowning at the screen. Then he looked at me with a mix of surprise and caution. He said there was a file, but it was marked as sealed and tied to an external legal order. He said he could not release anything without proper authorization. He suggested, in careful words, that I might need a lawyer. The words sat in my chest like a stone. I thanked him and left, feeling the air in the hallway press against me. In one day, I had learned that my mother had fled this family with me in her arms, that they had paid her to vanish, and that my earliest medical records were locked away behind legal walls. Back at the catering office, things were not any better. HR called me in again. Victor was there this time, sitting in the corner like a patient shadow. The HR woman slid the same folder toward me, this time open, showing a thick non-disclosure agreement filled with long sentences and small print. She said it was a simple formality to prevent gossip. She said the Cole family was being generous, offering compensation, and letting the Vase accident go. Victor watched my face, waiting to see if fear would make me easy to manage. Trent sat near the door, arms crossed, ready to remind me how lucky I was to have any job at all. My hands shook again, but this time not from confusion. I felt a different kind of heat under my skin, slow and steady. I thought about my mother's words, about men who owned everything, about how they expected people like us to say thank you when they threw us crumbs. I closed the folder. I pushed it back across the table. I said I would not sign anything that asked me to stay silent about my own life. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Trent started to raise his voice, saying I was making a mistake, that I was being ungrateful, that people like me did not get many chances. Victor lifted a hand, stopping him. He told me, in that same calm tone, that refusing could make things difficult. He said reputations mattered. He said employers talked. I met his eyes and told him that some things were more important than staying quiet to keep a bad job. My voice was not loud, but it did not shake. When I walked out of the HR office, my legs felt weak, but my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I stepped outside into the staff loading bay, where the air smelled of exhaust and old food. For the first time, I let myself think a full, solid thought. They were afraid of something I had not even seen yet. If they were afraid, it meant I had more power than they wanted me to believe. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I stood there, leaning against the cold brick wall. A calendar alert popped up from an unfamiliar address, inviting me to a follow-up discussion at Coal Industries headquarters the next week. As I stared at it, another notification appeared on the screen, a missed call and voicemail from a small law office I did not recognize, the name Jonah Wells blinking on the display like a quiet door I had not known existed until that moment. I listened to Jonah's voicemail that night while sitting at my small kitchen table, the same table where I had studied my scars and my mother's tired eyes. His voice was low and steady. He said he had seen my name come through in connection with a sealed file request, and that he sometimes helped people who found themselves up against walls they did not understand. He did not promise miracles. He simply said that the law had rules, and that, if I wanted, he could help me read them. I called him back. We agreed to meet the next day at his office. It was not in one of the shiny towers downtown, but in an older building with creaking steps and a narrow hallway. His name was on a small plaque by a frosted glass door. Inside, the office was quiet and orderly, with shelves of thick books and a couple of framed degrees on the wall. He looked like the opposite of Victor. No perfect suit, no polished smile. Just a man in a slightly worn blazer with careful eyes and hands that moved slowly, like he wanted every gesture to count. He offered me coffee and let me tell the story from the beginning. I talked about the party, the broken vase, the photos of the baby, my mother's confession at the diner, the sealed medical file, the NDA folder in HR, and the calendar alert for a meeting at Coal Industries. I spoke in simple words, the only ones I knew, but as I talked, I felt the shape of the story become bigger, like something you could see from above instead of just stumbling through it from the ground. Jonah listened without interrupting much. When I finished, he sat back and folded his hands. He said that what I was describing sounded like a mix of old settlements, possible paternity issues, and maybe even trust or inheritance questions, depending on how that family had structured their money and property. He said that rich families often use legal tools to control not just their assets, but also their stories. Then he said a sentence that stuck with me. He said that the law did not care about feelings, only about facts written down properly, and that people with power relied on that to stay safe. But it also meant that if facts were on my side, feelings from the other side would not be enough to bury them forever. I asked him what I could do with no money and no connections. He said I had more than I thought. I had my own identity, my own records, my mother's story, the sealed file, and the reaction of a very public man in a room full of witnesses. He said if even part of what I suspected was true, there would be paper somewhere, and paper was something the law understood. He explained, slowly and without big words, that we could start by checking public records. Employment logs, property documents, old incident reports. He offered to go with me. I left his office feeling like I was not completely alone in this for the first time. We met the next day at the city public records office. The building was old and full of the smell of dust and copier toner. Clerks moved around with stacks of files, and the hum of old machines filled the air. Jonah showed me how to fill out request forms and where to look up old staff lists and property reports. We found the estate listed under a holding company, then tracked down staff payroll records from the time my mother said she had worked there. It took hours of flipping through scanned lists and squinting at names, but there it was at last. Helena Pierce, listed as alive and housekeeper at the estate. Her name appeared on the lists for a while, then abruptly vanished after a certain date. On that same date, there was a brief note in another file about an electrical fire incident in the staff wing. It did not mention injuries or deaths, just property damage and repairs. Tiny lines on a page, but they matched the big, messy picture my mother had painted with her fear. I stared at the printout, feeling like I was looking at the skeleton of my own past. Jonah pointed out how sudden the termination was, how the note about the fire did not line up with the way my mother described screaming and smoke and confusion. He said it was not proof of everything, but it showed that something had happened and that my mother had indeed been there. From there, we followed another trail. Helena's old medical card had the clinic's name. The clerk there had already told me about the sealed file. Now, with Jonah beside me, we asked again. This time, the clerk's eyes went straight to the letter he carried, with some legal phrasing I did not fully understand but appreciated like a shield. The answer was still the same. The file was sealed by court order years ago. Access would require new motions and maybe a judge's review. On the way out, Jonah explained that nothing had been denied forever. It just meant that someone had locked the box and we would need the right key. He said the key was not feelings, but proper paperwork. As we stepped back into the street, I felt the city pressing around me, full of people who had no idea that a quiet dishwasher was tracing the edges of a story that had been hidden before he could even speak. A few days later, the meeting at Coal Industries came due. Their headquarters towered above the street like a glass and steel reminder of how much they owned. The lobby was all marble and metal, with a huge logo on the wall and a receptionist who looked like she had been carved to match the building, sharp, polished, and distant. I wore my best shirt, the one I usually saved for holidays and rare dinners out. It still looked small and plain in that space. I checked in at the desk. The receptionist gave me a visitor badge with my name printed on it and a color strip that marked me as someone who belonged only temporarily. A security guard escorted me up in an elevator that moved fast and smooth. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked like an extra from someone else's life. In the small conference room where they put me, Victor was waiting with a woman I had not met before. She introduced herself as part of the company's communications team. Everything about her suggested she was used to shaping stories and putting out fires. They offered me water, spoke about how grateful they were that I had come, and repeated that the vase was covered by insurance, that no one wanted me to suffer financially because of a simple mistake. Then they shifted to what really mattered. They talked about sensitive history, about misunderstandings, about the emotional impact the photos I had seen might have had on me. They said they did not want me to feel distressed or confused. Their words sounded like concern, but they sat wrong in my stomach. Victor slid a new version of the agreement toward me. This one was thicker. It included phrases about not discussing private family matters, not sharing images or details from restricted areas, not making any public statements that could be interpreted as claims of relation or entitlement. The numbers on the compensation page were larger this time, enough to cover a year or two of rent, enough to make a poor person stop asking questions if the only thing they feared was losing what little they had. I listened, then asked a simple question. If the Vase was covered, if my shock was just emotional, why did their document talk so much about blood, family, and claims? The communications woman stiffened. Victor adjusted his tie. They said it was just standard language, that their advisors insisted on this kind of wording to avoid confusion. They said people sometimes tried to take advantage of the family's generosity and invent connections that did not exist. They were not looking at my hands, my scars, or my face when they said it. They were looking at the balance of power in the room. I told them I had visited public records and the clinic. I told them I knew my mother had worked in the house when the fire happened. I told them I knew my file was sealed for reasons that had nothing to do with a simple kitchen accident. I did not accuse them of anything. I just stated the facts I had, one by one, like plates lined up in a row. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. The communications woman started talking faster about how old events can become tangled in memory over time. She said chasing ghosts would not help my current situation. I told them I had spoken to a lawyer. The room cooled. They exchanged a quick look. Victor gathered the agreement and said they would reconsider their approach. I left the building with no new papers in my pocket, but with a strange feeling in my chest. They had not repeated the threats about my job. They had not pushed as hard as before. That meant something. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and searched the news for coal industries. Most of the articles were about profits, projects, and charity work. But several recent ones talked about an upcoming Legacy and Future Summit, a big event where the company planned to present its long-term strategy and succession plan. Pictures of Lysander and Cassian appeared under the headlines. In one, they stood side by side, smiling, with the caption saying that the next generation was ready to lead. I read every line. The summit would include a closed board session and a larger presentation to investors and press. It was clearly important to them, a carefully planned moment where they would show the world a neat, polished story about their family and their business. I sat back in my chair and thought about something Jonah had said. People with power structure, not just their money, but their stories. If their story depended on one son stepping forward, what did it mean if another son stepped into the light at the same time? A few days later, I met Jonah again in his office. I handed him my notes from the records office, the clinic visit, and the meeting at Coal Industries. He read them slowly, nodding. He said the pieces were lining up. He told me, in simple terms, that if DNA testing confirmed a biological link between me and Lysander, and if certain trust documents existed, I might have legal rights I had never imagined. Not just to money, but to a seat at a table they never expected me to approach. He did not promise an easy path. He said they would fight, that their lawyers would try to delay, confuse, and discourage, but he also said that the law cared about paper, and paper could be forced into the light. We talked about next steps, motions to access the sealed file, requests for testing, ways to document the attempts to silence me. Each step sounded heavy, but also real. As I left his office, my phone buzzed. It was a new message from Jonah, sent just after I walked out. He had attached a short note. He said he had dug through some old filings tied to the coal estate and their corporate structure. Near the end, one line stood out to me even in his simple explanation. He said there was mention of a family trust with a clause about any surviving biological issue, and that, depending on how that was interpreted, my existence might change more than just one man's story at a party. Jonah's message about the trust clause stayed on my phone screen long after I finished reading it. The words, any surviving biological issue, glowing like a small, sharp light in the dark. I did not understand all the technical meaning, but I understood enough to know that if the law recognized someone like me, the story the Coles had been telling the world for years would not be complete anymore. The next time I sat across from Jonah in his office, he had a thin stack of notes on his desk. He spoke slowly, making sure every part made sense to me. He said that if I really wanted to move forward, there were practical steps we had to take, and each one would pull us deeper into conflict with people who had far more power. He did not say it to scare me, just to make sure I understood that this path could not be half-walked. We talked about the sealed medical file. He said we could file motions to have a court review the order that kept it locked. He said we could argue that as the person named in that file, I had a right to know what it contained. He talked about DNA testing, about how simple it was to swab someone's cheek and compare it to another person's sample. but how complicated it became when the person on the other side of the test was a billionaire who had spent years avoiding certain truths. He told me that sometimes, in cases like this, judges could order testing if enough evidence suggested a connection worth exploring. He told me that attempt to silence me with agreements, pressure at work, and careful language about family history could all become part of a pattern that a court might notice. He did not promise any specific result. He just laid out the path like a series of stepping stones across a dark river. I listened and then asked him something simple. I asked what would happen if I did nothing, if I took their money, signed their paper, and went back to washing dishes. He held my gaze and said that if I did that, nothing changed for them. They kept their story. Their trust and succession plan stayed clean and unchallenged. He said the only real question was whether I could live with that for the rest of my life. On the bus home, his words moved around in my head like slow waves. At my apartment, I found my mother waiting outside my door, her shoulders hunched and her hands pressed into the pockets of her coat. She rarely came without warning. When she saw me, she looked both relieved and upset. Inside, she sat at the table while I boiled water for tea. The room felt smaller than ever. She said she had been thinking about what she had told me at the diner and that she was afraid. Not just in the general way she had always been afraid of men like the Coles, but in a sharp, immediate way. She said she had noticed calls from numbers she did not know, and a man in a suit watching her building for a while before walking away. She said it might be nothing, but in her voice I heard the old panic she must have felt the night of the fire. She told me she wanted me safe. She said I should let the past stay buried. I listened, then told her about Jonah and the trust clause and what might happen if tests and records lined up. I did not use legal words. I just said that the law might finally admit I was more than a mistake in the wrong building. My mother stared at the chipped rim of her cup. She said when she was young and standing in that burning hallway with me in her arms, it felt like the world could swallow both of us in one bite. She said the money they gave her back then felt like the only shield she had. But now, she said, she could see that the shield had also been a leash on my life. Tears slid down her cheeks without sound. She reached out and touched my hand and said she did not know what the right choice was anymore. I told her that for me, the right choice was to stop letting other people decide what I was allowed to know about myself. I told her I would not aim to destroy anyone, just to watch them fall, but I also would not accept being erased. She nodded slowly, still afraid, but she did not tell me to stop again. That was her way of giving me permission, even if it scared her. A few days later, Jonah and I stood together in the courthouse lobby. The place smelled like old paper and floor polish, and the sound of footsteps echoed off the hard surfaces. People moved through security checkpoints, clutching folders and bags. Some looked annoyed, some looked broken, some looked numb. Jonah guided me to a clerk's desk. He had prepared documents with simple explanations about who I was, where I had been treated as an infant, and why I was asking the court to review the sealed file and consider orders for further steps. He handed me a pen and asked me to sign where he had marked. My name looked small on the lines, but it was there, next to his neat signature. As the clerk stamped the papers and took them away, I felt something shift inside me. It was different from signing a work contract or a lease. Those had always felt like me asking politely to be allowed to stay somewhere. This felt like me quietly insisting that I existed in a system that had tried not to see me. When we stepped back out into the light, Jonah reminded me that nothing changed overnight. He said there would be waiting, responses, arguments. He said the Coles lawyers would likely try to slow everything down, question motives, suggest delays. But he also said that once a process like this started, it became harder to completely erase. Paper left trails, and trails were things courts could follow even if powerful people wanted to pretend nothing was there. At home, the waiting began. Days stretched, filled with shifts at the kitchen, with hot water and plates and the same tired jokes among the staff. Trent glared at me more than usual, but he had fewer sharp words. It was like he had been told to back off, at least in public. I noticed small changes, too. Some shifts I used to have disappeared from the schedule without explanation. New names replaced mine. But then, other times, I was kept on for events connected to the Cole family, as if someone wanted me close enough to watch. It was a strange kind of pressure, both distance and leash. Maya noticed my mood and asked what was going on. I told her only that I was dealing with something complicated and that I was talking to a lawyer. Her eyebrows shot up. She said that usually meant trouble, but then she smiled a little and said, maybe for once the trouble would not be only on my side. At night, when the building was quiet and only the hum of the fridge kept me company, I read articles about the upcoming Coal Industries Summit. The headlines spoke about legacy, continuity, the next chapter. Most of the photos showed Lysander and Cassian together, the father serious and polished, the son grinning like someone who believed the world was already his. There were quotes about the importance of family values and long-term planning. None of the articles mentioned babies in burning staff wings or sealed files with other names and other scars. Eventually, Jonah called with updates. He said the court had agreed to review the sealed file order. He said there would be private hearings and discussions I would not have to attend, at least not yet. He said he had reasons to believe that some records would be opened, at least to the extent needed to confirm medical facts from that night. He also said he expected pushback. He told me that no one liked surprises before a major public summit, especially not ones tied to old tragedies. When I asked him what that meant for me in practical terms, he said it meant I should expect contact. Calls, messages, maybe even visits, all framed as concern, but built as pressure. He said if anyone tried to push papers into my hands, I should send them to him. He said to keep my voice calm and my answers simple. The first sign he was right came in the form of a letter slipped under my door. It was on expensive paper with a tidy letterhead, softly worded, talking about family sensitivities and the hope that we could resolve things quietly without public conflict. It did not threaten me directly. It simply painted a picture of what would happen if rumors or misunderstandings reached the press, hinting at damage to reputations and careers, including my own. I brought it to Jonah. He read it and smiled without humor. He said they were worried. That was good. It meant they were taking me seriously. A week later, he called again and told me, in careful but steady words, that certain things had been confirmed. He did not say everything over the phone. He simply said that what we had suspected was not fantasy, that the records from the clinic and the fire incident lined up in ways that would be hard to ignore, and that the next steps would involve formal meetings where their lawyers and our side would sit at the same table. That was when he mentioned the summit again. He said there would be a closed board session before the public announcement. He said, because of the filings and the evidence, they could not pretend I did not exist during that session. He said I would be asked to appear at the building on the same day, not as staff, but as someone whose presence needed to be acknowledged. When the official notice arrived, it came by messenger, not by email. The envelope felt too heavy for its size. Inside, a letter invited me to attend a confidential discussion regarding family matters at Coal Industries headquarters on the morning of the summit. The language was formal and stiff, but the weight of it pressed down on my chest. I set the letter on my table next to the rent bill and the grocery list. The contrast between them made me feel slightly dizzy. One evening, I climbed back up to the building's roof. The city looked the same as always, but I did not. I practiced what I might say if asked to speak. I kept it simple. I told the air that I was a man who had washed dishes for years in other people's houses, that my scars matched a baby they once called dead, that I had lived my life in the shadow of a story that had no space for me. I said I was not there to demand a throne. I was there to demand that my existence be recorded correctly in the places that mattered. The wind took my words and scattered them, but saying them out loud helped. When the morning of the summit came, I dressed carefully. Best shirt, cleanest pants, shoes polished as well as their worn leather would allow. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like their world. I looked like myself, a man who had spent years invisible and had finally decided to stop cooperating with his own erasure. On the train into downtown, I watched the towers grow taller through the window. People around me scrolled through news on their phones. Some of those headlines were about the summit I was heading toward, full of praise and expectations. No one knew that one of the people involved in that story had spent the morning making sure his collar lay flat on a shirt bought with shift wages. At the base of the coal building, security guided me through the same lobby as before. This time, the receptionist's smile was more forced, and the guard who scanned my ID held the notice letter a little longer than needed. My visitor badge printed again, but this time there was a different color on it, a stripe that marked me for access to higher floors. As I walked toward the elevators, I saw executives in suits and assistants, with tablets moving with fast purpose. They barely glanced at me. To them, I was still just another name on a list, but I knew something they did not fully understand yet. The law had started to write me into their story, whether they liked it or not. I stepped into an empty elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing me in with my reflection once more. My phone buzzed in my pocket as the elevator began to rise. A calendar alert flashed on the screen, labeled with quiet, simple words: Coal Board Session. Succession. The elevator opened into a quiet hallway lined with glass, and an assistant led me into the boardroom without small talk or smiles. The room was long and bright, with the city spread out beyond the windows and a polished table running down the middle like a line drawn through the air. Board members sat in high chairs, papers and tablets in front of them. Cassian lounged near one end, relaxed, as if this day belonged to him by default. Lysander sat at the head, looking tired and older than at the party. Jonah was already there at my side, a small, neat stack of documents in front of him. When we sat, the room settled. Victor began speaking first. He called this a delicate situation. He spoke about misunderstandings, emotional reactions, and the need to protect the company from rumors. He tried to shape the story in those careful words. Jonah did not raise his voice when it was his turn. He simply laid out the facts. He said the court had reviewed the sealed neonatal file and confirmed that a baby under my mother's name had been treated after the fire at the estate. He said DNA testing, done under proper supervision, showed near certain paternity between Lysander and me. He slid copies of the summaries toward the board, not toward Cassian or Sienna, and waited while eyes moved down the pages. Then Jonah mentioned the trust clause. He read the key line aloud, the one about any surviving biological issue. He explained in simple language that the law now recognized I existed in that category, and that certain planned transfers and announcements could no longer proceed as if I did not. Cassian started to speak fast, calling this an attack and a setup. Sienna warned about scandal. Victor argued about timing, but the board members did not look at them. They looked at the papers and at Lysander. After a long moment, Lysander said, in a flat voice, that the facts were what they were, that he had once believed his first child had died, and that now he knew that child was sitting at the table. He did not reach for me. He did not smile. He simply admitted it in front of witnesses who mattered. The board chair then spoke. He said the trust terms were clear. He said planned succession packages would be frozen and revised. He said Victor's conduct around silence agreements would be reviewed. He said I would receive the rights attached to my status under the trust, including shares and a formal role in future discussions. There was no applause. There was only the quiet sound of decisions settling into place. When the meeting ended, I stood. My visitor badge lay on the table, a symbol of how they saw me when I walked in. An assistant came over with a small envelope and a plastic card. Inside was formal notice of my new standing and a permanent access card printed with my name. I slid the visitor badge across the table and took the new card in my hand. Cassian stared at it like it was a weapon. The boardroom door closed behind Jonah and me with a soft click, leaving their polished world on one side and the echo of their silence on the other.